Let's welcome in now geopolitical advisor, GOP strategist, and senior advisor to our Republican legacy, Rina Shah, along with energy analyst and writer David Blackman. Good afternoon to you both. Rina, I want to get your perspective. What do you believe the U.S. goals are in this blockade of Iranian ports?
Well, nice to be with you. As somebody who's under the banner of our Republican legacy, I approach the situation with the same concern for American interests and constitutional order that has guided the many Republicans I've served for a decade and a half on Capitol Hill. I think this moment is very interesting for many younger Americans in particular, because we didn't think we'd be here right now. We have a war-weary public, and to see 21 hours of talks in Islamabad and no deal, Vance was clear. Iran wouldn't give the nuclear assurances the U.S. demanded. Okay, that's fine. But I think what we also saw was Trump responding with that classic maximum pressure that he thinks will always work, the naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. I get it. The goal is at least attempting to be straightforward here, stopping Iranian oil exports, clearing the mines they've laid, and enforcing free navigation for everyone. But look, talks collapsing and Trump flipping from negotiation to enforcement basically says no more one-sided games at the world's most critical oil choke point. It is a tough thing to understand what may happen from here while we have a fragile 2-week ceasefire, again, kicked off just a few days ago, which is, again, still technically in effect until April 22nd. And so all of us are doing a hurry up and wait right now.
David, what is your perspective? It seems to me like this is a maximum pressure campaign to get Iran back to the negotiating table in good faith this time that will be willing to accept the president's terms.
Yes, it does seem that way. And of course, singling out ships for this blockade that are going into and out of Iranian ports to the exclusion of all other traffic, certainly makes sense in that respect. But I reflect the view that we're all in kind of hurry up and wait mode, trying to understand the details of exactly how the blockade will function before we can really assess the effect it's going to have on energy markets and markets for fertilizer, helium, and all these other exports that come out of the Middle East that are so critical to the global economy. So it's really a fraught time right now for not just the United States and related to gas prices, but really for every country on earth that depends on these exports coming out of that region.
Rina, what do you think are the risks of this blockade? Certainly there are a number of them, given the fact that we've got U.S. military assets on the ground in the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, look, short term, Iran is already threatening to make no port safe in the Gulf there. And what they're also doing is calling this piracy. So I think we can expect missile and drone probes, proxy attacks via the Houthis, because they've done it before. But their military is depleted after years of sanctions and conflict. That is an important note there. But the next 48 to 72 hours will tell us so much. Do they test the blockade and risk direct hits, or do they play for time? That's a real question. This blockade squeezes their oil revenue very hard, very fast. And that is leverage. That is the leverage. But energy markets are already twitching upwards. So if it drags, gas prices here could spike and feed right into that pocketbook restlessness we've seen in some of these special elections that actually have been going on here stateside.
David, but we are seeing some diversion from the Strait of Hormuz, from the Middle East to the United States. The president spoke about this earlier today, saying that there's 121 tankers, empty oil tankers, from the Middle East, from Asia, coming up to the U.S. ports and loading it up because we're so dominant with that. We're also seeing Saudi Arabia and the UAE divert some of their oil and gas production from moving through the Strait to the Red Sea or through pipelines. What do you make of this?
Well, of course, those alternatives in the Middle East have really been very helpful in this crisis. Saudi Arabia is sending 7 million barrels a day out into the Red Sea. And, of course, the UAE has its pipeline to the Indian Ocean that can carry as much as 1.9 million barrels a day. So that's been very helpful in this crisis. And you're right, all these tankers are now headed to the Gulf of America and to these refineries along the Gulf Coast. The United States is ramping up exports. We just saw a forecast this morning from Goldman Sachs that U.S. exports are going to hit 5 million barrels a day in May, probably, and that's up from 3.5 million before the conflict began. And I think there's quite a bit of additional capacity for the United States to ramp up further here in the coming weeks to help supply the globe in this crisis. But we're still going to be in a very undersupplied market overall, and that's going to put more upward prices on upward pressure on oil prices and gas prices at the pump.
Rina, what do you make of the participation of our Western allies? You had Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, announce a summit today with France to discuss opening the strait after the war has been completed. It seems like a little too late. Pretty much all the time with the Europeans and with the French. How could they assist us here? And do you think that there will be a shift in NATO after this war is ended?
Well, that's the question du jour. And it's a question I quite like because I'm somebody that understands how NATO works. And how NATO works is that real allyship to make a safer world for us all. And none of us have, I think, taken it for granted. But the moment really feels rather bizarre because I don't know that they trust us, our allies, as much as they used to. Look, I think there's a lot at stake here for our European allies. I don't blame them for taking their time to think. But I also want to be very clear here that from a domestic standpoint, this tests whether our leadership delivers results that people here stateside can feel and people abroad can feel. I believe we will see an evolution, not a rupture in NATO's posture. I want to be very clear about that. The Strait of Hormuz crisis has really underscored a long-standing reality. NATO's original focus on European territorial defense is necessary, but really maybe not be as sufficient in a world where energy choke points, nuclear proliferation, and Indo-Pacific threats intersect. So I would say after this crisis, we ought to expect a couple things, if you'll stick with me for a moment. Just renewed pressure from Washington for our European allies to take greater responsibility for out-of-area missions, like Gulf security, and maybe even a possible formal NATO dialogue or working group on energy security and maritime checkpoints. This is something I've been digging into lately or having discussions around town about. That's something the U.S. has advocated for years. And then maybe thirdly, also just a greater emphasis on burden sharing metrics that include naval projections that go beyond the North Atlantic. So I would just say this is not about abandoning NATO. It's about adapting the alliance to 21st century realities.
Rina Shah, David Blackman, thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.